to our special webinar series. As you know, that we have started this webinar series keeping in mind the latest issues that are concerning India. And we, as a research based policy think tank, always make an attempt to bring the best minds in the country or across the world to talk to us about contemporary issues. It is in that context, for a couple of months now, we have been thinking that while we have been talking hardcore economic issues, we've been getting people from India and abroad to speak on those. We haven't done enough on the labor laws. So we did have in mind Professor Kingshuk Sarkar, and we are very fortunate that he kindly agreed to be here and deliver a talk to us. I've seen that he offers very expensive programs. Some of them I can't afford, but I'm hoping to get an executive summary of those programs today so that I can escape joining those programs. Maybe I'll be incentivized to join those programs. Today, I think we are very lucky to have Madam Gauri Kumar to chair this session. Now, Madam Kumar has a very illustrious career, a 1979 IAS officer batch, and then during her career, she has, as a civil servant, had various administrative positions. But the one which I think was most important, and that's why we wanted her to be here today, that she has served as a secretary in the Ministry of Labor and Employment. Now, that I think was the most important thing that she will bring in for us the latest wisdom, and the professor tells us all the developments that have been there. She has, of course, held various administrative positions throughout her career, but again, the another important one, which I think was very good, she was the Director General of the National Institute of Fashion and Technology, Ministry of Textiles. I thought was very good. And in 2015, she took charge as member chairperson of the Public Enterprise Selection Board. Again, lots of experience into type of things that we are going to be talking today. I'm very impressed. She has, of course, done her initial studies in India, and I can't imagine she must be a super genius. She completed her MS in mathematics from Lucknow University and was awarded 7 gold medals in the course of her studies for exceptional academic distinction. Now, this is something most of the people who are on the forum today would benefit because most of us are academicians, scholars, and researchers. The other one which I am very impressed is because I myself was there as a postdoc at Harvard. She has done her master's in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, and as a fellow of the Mason Program of Public Policy and Management, she was awarded the Littler Fellowship, which is a very prestigious fellowship by Harvard for commitment to excellence, academic achievement, and public service. So, with this brief introduction of the chairperson, I would now like Madam uh, Kumar to chair the session and take the proceedings forward.
Thank you, Dr. Charan Singh. A pleasure and a privilege to be here. Uh, as I was mentioning, labor and industry is a very symbiotic relationship. And for that relationship to work harmoniously, it's critical that we have a very fine calibration of that relationship, and we have the perfect balance between the two interests. Uh, Also, that whatever the word of law says, it should be there should be an environment in which there is good compliance and good enforcement, because without that the word of law by itself doesn't really say much. Now, we are all aware, as economists, as labor market people who watch labor market, that that this particular relationship has been under stress over the years, uh, and uh, and and different efforts have been made to calibrate it perfectly, and these are ongoing efforts. Since it's such a sensitive matter, it may be good to put things in a little perspective. And Dr. Chan Singh mentioned that when I was in the Ministry of Labor, let's see what was the situation in 14, because that's a time when the codification was started. Actually, it started in the year 2014 when I was there. And at that point of time, we had something like 4.25 crore. This is in October of 2014. We had 4.25 crore subscribers registered under Employees Provident Fund Organization, which provides formal social security cover to the organized laborers. Now, anybody's guess at that point of time was this is hardly 20% of the total workforce. And it was a very major concern for all of us that we were leaving out 80% of the working population. The trade unions also represent only the formal workers. So what happens to the informal workers? What happens to the so-called dividend in terms of population that we always expected? ESIC, which provides health insurance, only had 1.95 crore workers registered. Now, that was the situation. We had, by any guess, we had about 10 crore construction workers. And the construction workers and the contract workers, who also were around the same number estimated to be, they were all outside the scope of any formal security, social security. They were outside any union, trade union. So, when we talk of things, it's important that we don't lose the context and we don't lose the relative changes that are, because there is nothing which is perfect. It's, as I said, it's a process of calibration which is going on for quite some time, which will continue to go on for quite some time. So, in the year 2014, we passed we managed to take through the parliament the Apprenticeship Amendment Act. And what it did was, it was to unshackle. And in that process, we realized that if we were to take all the 44 central acts on labor and a myriad of state acts, because it's in the concurrent list, so we have, I'm told, about double those number of state acts. And just think about it, how does enforcement happen? How does compliance happen? Even if somebody was willing to comply, how does he do it with so many multitude of 44 central acts and more than double state acts? And then in October 2014, we launched the Shramev Jayate Karyakram, where we actually, for the first time, we got universal account numbers issued with portability to 2 crore out of those 4.25 crore EPFO subscribers. And this was the first time it happened. It hadn't happened. There's no provision in the act to do it, but all the same, despite all the activism, this was going on. And that number, I'm very happy to note that from 4.25 crores in October of 2014, the number has grown to 6.75 crores. So we managed to at least make some dent. Now, the codification was actually, which was started, was a response to the existing situation at that point of time, where multitude of acts, very poor enforcement, you had a lot of arbitrage coming in from inspections. So what we did was, we gave labor identification numbers to the industry. So on the one side, you have the formal workers with EPFO numbers, which became portable. Becoming portable meant that the 30,000 crore, which was lying with us in suspense account because people couldn't withdraw their money. So if you moved from one place to the other, there was no way that you could carry your account with you, because it is only the employer who sits on your EPFO. You wouldn't even know what amount has gone into your account. So the process was initiated in October 2014, Shramev Jayate Karyakram, with release of universal account numbers with portability to EPFO, with the unshackling of the amendments, through the amendments to Apprenticeship Act. We did a lot of reforms in ITIs. The only scheme which was available to unorganized workers at that time was the health insurance scheme, and that was streamlined. So I'm very happy today to introduce Kingshuk Sarkar. Kingshuk brings to us the knowledge of execution in West Bengal as a labor administrator. And he has since then been doing a lot of academic work, working on research, working on papers, and currently he teaches at the Goa Management Institute. So, Kingshuk, we are looking forward to navigating with you the four codes that are there and see what are the challenges as being in the concurrent list. These codes are now converted into rules, into execution, into regulations between the central and the state governments, and how these challenges will be tackled in the days to come. So over to you, Kingshuk, and welcome very much to this seminar. You're on mute, Kingshuk.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam, for this kind introduction and introducing the topic for the audience. And it's a privilege to be part of the EGROW Foundation talk. So I'm very thankful to Professor Charan Singh for giving me this opportunity. And thank you, Madam, for chairing this session and introducing the topic. So I will be today the topic, just a second, I share my screen. Is my screen visible? Can you see?
Yes, it is. It is. Kingshuk, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, madam. So I will be, there are three parts to my presentation. First, I will be give a brief introduction of the situation, labor market realities in India, some basic indicators, and then I will move into the debate of labor reforms from where the idea of code germinated. And then I will discuss the impact of code on our future labor market, kind of repercussion of the code on the labor market in India. So these are the basic structure of the presentation. To start with, I will deal with a few labor market indicators and then move on to labor reform debate and then to the formulation of code and what the code has stored, what the codes have in the details, of, not very details, but there are some implications of the codes on the labor market. So analyzing the Indian labor market poses inherent challenges given the country's size and diversity. So it's a very heterogeneous kind of a situation. And rather than a case of like, there is this thing, jobless growth, and this jobless growth kind of phenomena is not a factor, not a matter of last 2 decades. Even 1980s, when the manufacturing registered quite a substantial growth, even in that case also, the manufacturing employment did not go up to that extent. So we have these issues for a long period of time that India, relative to the world situation, experienced reasonably good growth, GDP growth rate, but its employment situation did not keep pace with the GDP growth rate. So some people called it jobless growth kind of a thing. Another 2 factors that is very important in India's labor market situation is that female labor force participation is going down. Many people find it very strange. Like we see more women in the public place commuting to they are going to the workplace, coming back. So those who are living in urban areas, we may find it very strange to believe that actually female labor force is going down. Participation of female labor force is going down. And another thing is that another very kind of a one, you can say, very secular trend that is happening is that informalization of the labor force. So almost more than 90% of our labor force are in the informal. But these informal laborers are also part of the formal sector too. It's not that informal workers only work in the informal sector. They work in the formal sector too. So a significant part of our formal sector has been using informal labor, particularly during after 1991. So the majority of our workers are in the informal sectors. with the nature, the informal sector is defined. Informal worker and informal sector are different. Informal workers are those who are working, who don't have any access to the social security. Basically, in India, the informality defined in terms of social security. If you are a beneficiary of EPFO in ESIC, then you are considered as formal, and if you are not, then you are considered as informal. Behind the apparent persistence of informality in the labor market, there are actually two underlying factors but diverging trends. First, the share of workers in the unorganized sector, enterprises with fewer than 10 workers, including own account workers, fell from 86.3% in 2004-5 to 84.3% in 2019. So the informality within the informal sector fell, but informality within the formal sector has gone up. So further, 82.2% in 11 to the fall in informality is from 86.3% to 84.3% to 82.2% between the period 2004-5, 9-10 and 11-12. At the same time, the share of informal workers in the organized sector has gone up, significantly gone up, because of use of more contract labor and other forms of casual labor. Due to these two countervailing trends, the percentage of workers in the informal employment in India has stayed around 92%, 92, 93%, stayed around 93%. One of the biggest puzzles, that emerged during the decades of 2000 was the fall in female labor force participation rate in India, which was most pronounced in rural areas and due to the withdrawal of women from agriculture. At now, India's labor force participation rate, as per the latest figure, is only 21%. So it is one of the most poor female labor force participation rate in the world. So this is a matter of a great concern. And the long-term challenge in India, like much of South Asia, is to increase the opportunities for women to work outside the home in decent and productive employment. So there's a great debate why there is this fall in female labor force participation rate. So my topic is not that, so I'm not going into details of that, but it is a major concern for Indian labor market. The female labor force participation rate in India had fallen from 20.3% in 2019, fallen to 20.3% in 2019 from 26% in 2005. According to the World Bank estimates, and it is compared, even compared to the neighboring Bangladesh, where it is 30.5%. This is it's for 21%. And now in 2019, and it fell from 26% in 2005. In 1990s, it was around 30%. So last 2 decades, there is a kind of a continuous fall in the female labor force participation rate. This graph also shows that in 2012, 23.04, now it is 20.0, 20 point something in 2019. These are some graphs. So this is female labor force participation rate in India, the rural and urban. Mostly female withdraw from labor from the rural from agriculture. So they like majority of the major part of this fall came from the rural sector. And if we compare to the male workforce participation rate, the gap is huge. So our labor force participation overall is around 46%. Where the developing countries average is around 56%, developed countries is more than 60%. So our overall labor force participation rate is much lower than even the developing country average. And within that, female labor force participation rate is much lower. So why the labor force participation rate is so low? That means the overall the market is the labor market is so depressed that many people who belong to the plus 15 age group but don't even actively look for employment. So that can be only possible reason for such a low labor market participation rate, even for overall labor market participation. That shows there is a huge reserve army of labor force which is waiting in the wing to be part of the labor market, which under the present circumstances, they are not part of the labor market. This is a sectoral kind of distribution of our national income. Just a minute. Our primary sector kind of contribution has fallen from 51% in 60-61 to 14% in 2020-21, and secondary also is around 18% to it has increased 25%, and tertiary sector contributes 61% now from 31% in 1960-61. So this kind of follows the kind of a Clark-Fisher hypothesis. As you move gradually move like on the development path, your primary sector contribution falls, secondary and tertiary sector increases, and after initially the tertiary, secondary sector increases much more than the tertiary, and ultimately tertiary sector overtakes you. India almost, like, apart from that secondary tertiary sector thing, it almost follows that trajectory. But if we look at the occupational distribution, that occupational distribution don't match the just a minute, it's not moving. The occupational distribution in India, if you look at it, even now, around 42% of workforce are still tied to the primary sector, when the primary sector is contributing only 14%. So secondary sector is giving livelihood to only 18.5% of the labor force, and tertiary sector is giving livelihood to 39.5%. So even though the contribution of the primary sector has gone down, still many people are dependent on the primary sector for the livelihood thing. So the sectoral distribution of income, if we look at the sectoral distribution of income, you will see that approximately 14% of the GDP is generated from the agricultural sector, that is primary sector, 25% from the industrial sector, and 61% from the service sector. Given the occupational distribution, this implies that a huge number of workers are still stuck in the primary sector, indicating huge underemployment and low productivity. The service sector is comparatively much more productive. However, without corresponding growth in the secondary sector, this might not be sustainable. This may not be sustainable in the long run. So we need to have secondary sector growth. Without the secondary sector growth regarding employment, we can't kind of sustain this kind of tertiary sector support. Even though like India's sectoral transformation somewhat follows the development trajectory as postulated by the Clark-Fisher hypothesis, the occupational transformation did not keep pace. So that in 2020-21, 42.21% of the workforce in India are employed in agriculture, while the secondary sector employ around 18.5% and service sector employ 39.5%. 39.5% of the workforce. While the share of Indians working in agriculture is declining, it is still the main sector of employment. The employment elasticity of the secondary sector is very low, and this sector could not absorb the excess labor released from the primary sector in any significant number. A part of such excess labor ended up as urban informal sector in the urban informal sector, as well as workers seeking out livelihood through doing some petty economic activities. So the labor force released from the agriculture could not be absorbed in the manufacturing sector, in the secondary sector. Many people have left agriculture, but they could not find meaningful livelihood in the secondary sector. So they ended up as a informal worker in the urban space. Sometimes they even did not get employment there, but they survive in the urban space through doing some petty economic activities like selling vegetables on the roadside, opening a chai shop, or kind of starting a small eatery. So this self-employment, but within the informal sector also, 50% of the informal sector are self-employed. So they do something on their own to survive. So employment growth, so like if you look at the employment growth trends, the average annual employment growth rate was about 2.4% in 1970s. This continued in the 1980s, but declined in the 1990s. And between 99, 2000 and 2004-5, there was spectacular jump in employment growth rate to 2.8%, which is hard to explain. However, in recent times, the recent rounds of data provided by the NSSO show that a sharp deacceleration in the growth rate of employment from 2004-5 to 2011-12 fell to a mere 0.5% from earlier 2.8%. In fact, during the same period, the GDP growth rate was remarkable. The employment growth rate fell to an all-time low. India witnessed a decent GDP growth rate throughout the last 2 decades, but the employment growth rate was mostly moderate. Moreover, whatever employment that has been created was mostly in the informal sector or within the informal part of the formal sector. So this is the index of real GDP growth rate and also that of employment. So you see the clear divergence. So our GDP is growing quite nicely, even though it slowed down in 2016-17 and then pandemic struck. But before that, it was growing nicely compared to the world average. But now the employment growth rate, barring a period of few years in early 2000, it is not kind of growing at all. The employment, the employment content of growth deteriorated as reflected in the substantial decline in the employment elasticity. The reason for deacceleration in employment include both policy level and technological changes in the production process over the last several years. Consequently, a significant component of GDP growth came from the productivity growth and increasing capital intensity of the economy. The deacceleration in employment growth has been accompanied by increasing informalization of the workforce. Over the years, organized sector employment has grown more slowly than total employment. Organized sector employment grew at 1.20% per annum during 83 to 94, but this rate fell to 0.53% between 94 and 2000, and that trend continued after that also. Consequently, the proportion of unorganized sector workers has gone up, mostly in construction, transport, storage, communication, financial services. Apart from new jobs largely being created in the unorganized sector, a large number of retrenched workers have found refuge in the unorganized sectors too. So there has been a lot of capital deepening happening in the manufacturing sector. The informal economy provides livelihood to more than 90% of the workforce, and India has witnessed steady informalization of the workforce since 1991. So we have a dual labor market. So one is a small segment of the labor market that is organized, and the labor law protection is available to this segment of the workers who are part of this organized labor force. On the other hand, there are a large number of establishments operate in the unorganized sector where workers are not unionized. Most of the union presence are in the organized sector. Unorganized sector union presence is very negligible, and they don't, almost apart from few labor laws, most of the labor law protections are outside the purview of these unorganized sector workers. So also now we move into the flexibility labor market, labor reform and flexibility debate that we have seen taking place for the last many years, at least last 30 years. So there is an intense debate on whether the labor market reforms in India in recent times. So it is argued that the restrictive labor laws that create inflexibility in the labor market. So there is a school of thought who believe that labor laws create inflexibility. So it makes the labor market rigid. So, and the Indian economy would have experienced a much higher growth of employment had these labor laws not been there. On the other hand, this view is vehemently opposed by trade unions and also many scholars. So this is a flexibility versus labor law kind of a thing. A major focus of India's ongoing policy debate over the labor market flexibility has been the statutory. I mean, the most, like, if we look at the debate, it is basically coming to the few sections of the Industrial Disputes Act, particularly Chapter 5B, which deals with layoff, retrenchment, closure, strike, lockout. So these are the few sections on which this entire flexibility debate hinges on. So this is about whether a particular establishment can like terminate workers without taking without taking approval from the appropriate government. The case of repealing that requirement for like is notably underpinned by many employers. Employers' demand was that they want flexibility in the labor deployment kind of a thing. So this the necessity of taking approval from government while you retrench workforce, that makes the Indian labor market inflexible or rigid as per the employers kind of perspective. And there are few scholars also which also supported this kind of view. Like this is based on basically Washington consensus, like which labor flexibility formed part of the package called the Washington Consensus. The framework for producing labor market flexibility was designed to deregulate the labor market and remove or cut the protective regulations. The Washington Consensus was based on what Stiglitz called the market fundamentalism. The basic idea behind this thesis was free market outcomes are efficient and Pareto optimal. So this was the based on this assumptions that free market outcomes are efficient and they are Pareto optimal. So labor law versus market distortion. So in case of the labor market, trade unions and protective labor legislations, the existence of trade union and existence of the protective labor laws are said to be market distorting agents. They distort the labor market, which curtail the free operation of market forces to ensure full employment of labor. In absence of these distortions, the market would have attained its full employment level. Interference by the collective institutions, particularly law and trade unions, in the market process increase the transaction cost, which also adversely affect the investment and thereby resulting in the unemployment and welfare loss. So this is the belief of almost all the employers in the organized sector and also few scholars. So there is also this insider outside conflict kind of a thing. A social divide is created which perpetuates this inequality, because you have this organized sector workforce which is protected by the labor laws, and huge unorganized sector these are called insiders, and the outsiders are those who are working in the informal part of the formal sector or fully informal sector, and they are termed as outsiders. So our outsiders, even though they are in majority, they don't get any labor law protection. So so we have this this two insider outside conflict kind of a thing. So there is also counter logic to this also. The several other economists also, they contest this view with their microeconomic and macroeconomic logic. Their argument is like this, that competing firms may compete either based on reducing their unit cost by lowering wages and labor standards. So establishments have two options. They can maximize their profit by lowering wages and labor standards, that is called the low road to growth. And the another was the pushing productivity through innovation, through better technology introduction, product design, through better organization. That is another option to the available to the establishment, that is called high road to growth. So you have these two, but mostly like in any Indian context, they have opted for the low road to growth. Just a minute. So they have this low road to growth kind of a thing. and the absence of a minimum floor of labor standards. So like those who this counter logic is that if you don't have a basic minimum kind of labor standards, then it can fall to such a low level that can lead to a race to the bottom. So the profit will be higher, but the basic minimum labor standard would be violated. So this is what is called the race to bottom kind of a thing. So this is also highlighted by many scholars that is actually happen in India. As long as a firm can continue competing based on low wages and bad working conditions, there is no motivation to innovate for improving productivity. Only when the path to competition based on low wages and bad working condition is barred by providing a kind of a floor of labor standards, the firms can become enterprising and invest in technological and organizational innovation, which in turn leads to better wages and working conditions. The absence of a minimum floor of labor standards would invariably ensure that the industrial economy in the syndrome of low wages and low productivity. This is what also known as race to the bottom. So like they believe that in India, the last 3 decades, this is what has happened. We are moving to the bottom with regards to the labor market. So deregulation and employment not related. So they also believe there are studies also showed that almost all over the world, the higher wage are associated with higher employment. There are like wage being higher, that is not a problem. Higher wage can coexist with higher employment also, implying that unemployment could be result of many other factors except high wages. A recent ILO study based on data collected from 162 countries concludes that stronger trade union rights do not necessarily hinder trade competitiveness, including trade of labor-intensive goods. And indeed, countries with stronger trade union rights tend to do competitively well. So there are evidences where countries with strong trade unions, they actually performed good. Their competitiveness did not go down because they have strong trade unions. So labor law, there is several economists. On the other hand, they think that labor law creates inflexibility. Labor law makes the market rigid. Several economists, industry association, and mainstream media have attributed the deacceleration in employment growth in India, particularly in the organized sector. They attributed to the rigidity of the labor market, which is believed to have increased because of the labor cost for the enterprises going up, and thereby hindering investment, and that includes foreign direct investment also and growth. Employment protection laws are also believed to be inefficient and inequitable, leading to a slowdown in growth and dividing workers into protected and unprotected categories, this insider outsiders dual kind of a thing. Social security of a limited kind is enjoyed only by 8 to 9% of the workforce. Overprotection of a small segment of the employment has also against the social justice. So they also said that it is against the social justice. So a recent study on the pattern of manufacturing growth during 1958 to 1992 concludes that states which amended the Industrial Dispute Act in a pro-worker direction experienced lower output, employment, and investment in manufacturing sector. So pro-worker amendment leads to a lowering of output, in investment and employment. So this was a study by Beasley and Burgess, which was published in 2004. And this study was cited by the employers organization and many other scholars also to show that the labor market is actually rigid. So, but the other school of thought, the other school believe that trade unions and other economists, they claim that labor cannot be treated like any other commodity. And measures like minimum wages, job security, separation benefits, social security, trade union rights are equally important and even politically necessary for sustaining the process of globalization. As they increase the labor productivity, the government is facing an acute dilemma over this issue, and labor and managements are loggerheads with each other, forcing the uh, government to kind of make a balance between these two kind of conflicting set of ideas and find a way of doing a credible labor reform, starting a credible labor reform process. So the labor policy, there is nothing called labor policy in our country as such. But if you look at the philosophy of labor policy had its root in the national movement. Like if you look at the labor administration, the ILO standards, this philosophy of labor had its roots in the national movement, and many legislative provisions for protecting labor were enacted before the independence. Some of the labor laws date back to the independence, which were strengthened after we got independence. Accordingly, the provisions of social security were made more comprehensive and expanded to uh, include various kind of risks also. Further, detailed laws governing industrial relations were enacted, and a mechanism for fixing and implementing minimum wages were also developed. So this is what we did after independence. The debate continues. However, this flexibility, this debate about has been intensifying over the years. In the earlier years of planning, when the expectations of economic growth were higher and unemployment was not thought to be a serious problem, the unemployment problem came up in the 90s and the last 2 decades. But in the 80s, up to the 80s, unemployment was not thought to be that up. Like that time, that focus was not that much on the relatively lower employment elasticity of manufacturing or tertiary sector. So the earlier years of planning, when the expectation of economic growth were higher and unemployment was not thought to be a serious problem, the issue did not draw much attention. But however, with a significant slowdown in the employment growth in the organized sector, the debate has become more relevant in recent years. So also we keep on giving the example of China. In the context, very often the example of China is given, which has drastically changed its system of labor market from rigid security of employment to one in which labor is extremely mobile. It is said that it is greatly helped China in generating employment as well as successfully redeploying workers who were laid off in the process of restructuring enterprises. It is argued that more than 100 developing countries have reformed their labor laws in response to the competitiveness in the era of globalization. But India remains among a few select countries with a very rigid system of labor protection. So debate remains inconclusive. So while there is an element of truth in argument on both sides, often there is a lack of objectivity also. And the ground realities prevailing in the labor market is in terms of insecurity, dynamics of labor process, the extent of implementation of labor laws, regulations. So labor laws, there are more than say 44 central labor laws, and large number of state labor laws do exist. But the thing is that their implementation, the enforcement of labor laws have been very poor, and it is documented also. So it is one thing that on paper you have labor laws, and the other thing you have to also take into account very kind of poor implementation of labor laws. So ground realities are quite different. And we have seen, in spite of these few protective clauses in the Industrial Dispute Act 1947, Indian labor force witnessed steady informalization over the years. And employment growth also did not take up. So it is very clear that lack of employment growth cannot be attributed to only to the existence of few clauses in the labor law. And also this phenomenon of jobless growth, the issue of flexibility in the labor. I think I've discussed this quite a lot, so I skip this slide. And this low employment elasticity of particularly the manufacturing sector. So even Make in India kind of initiative in the last 4 or 5 years did not make much of a difference. There has been increase in the EPFO registration over the last 5-6 years, but most of this EPFO registration came from registering the contract laborers which are attached to the organized sector rather than new employment being created. So this is addition to the EPFO, but they were already working, but not registered under EPFO. But because of certain government initiatives, they are now getting registered under the EPFO. So these not always, you cannot say all these are new employment creation. The sharp increase in real wages that happened. So real wages, and this is also kind of a, but this also stagnated after 2012. There was increase in real wages up to 2012, but also that also could not continue. And also we have to take this sharp increase in real wages along with the strategy of capital deepening. So because sharp increase in real wages were also held responsible for a decline in employment in the organized manufacturing sector, because this encouraged enterprises, irrespective of their size and organizational setup, to adopt a strategy of capital deepening. The process involved both modernization and pure substitution of capital for labor. And real wages accompanied high, but although rising labor costs are an important factor, but there are kind of many examples where you have real wages that is accompanied with higher productivity. So it's not that real wages are bad. Rise in real wages is kind of harming the labor market, because rise in real wages in many times because of higher productivity of labor force. Wage increase might not be responsible. Like wage increase does not seem to be an important factor in reducing employment in the organized manufacturing sector. This is corroborated by the fact that by and large, employer organizations and industry have not made wage increase their main target of reform in the labor market. In fact, minimum wages have generally been set lower than the market wages in industry, and their rationality has not been questioned also. Most of the industry organizations and some scholars argue that job security regulations restricted flexibility in the labor market, but that is not kind of what data and figures do not support that. So there is inherently, our labor market, I think, is inherently flexible. In spite of this debate, the Indian labor market is quite flexible despite so-called restrictive labor laws. However, at the same time, Indian labor laws are so numerous, complex, and even ambiguous that they promote litigation rather than resolution of problems related to the industrial relations. A comprehensive view of labor market reforms is required, one that addresses the need for both the employers and workers. This multiplicity of labor laws is not good for even for the workers also. They are also confused. Employers are also confused. A rational way of a rational way out would be to simplify and rationalize the existing labor law. And you also, these labor laws become old. You need to make the labor laws contemporary, make it relevant in today's context, because a lot of changes happened in the world of work. So the labor laws in certain part of the labor laws has become obsolete over the years. So we need to kind of take a relook of the labor laws and try to make this relevant in the present context. So the process started. The process started in 2017, and the drafting and the codification started. There are four broad categories identified. One is wage, another is industrial relation, social security, occupational safety, health, working conditions. So these are the four broad categories, and 29 laws were compartmentalized into are merged within these four labor laws, not 44. So 29 labor laws have been merged within these four codes. Wage code was passed. The first code was wage code that was passed in 2019 August, and the next three sets of codes were passed during September 2020 after pandemic happened. So the wage code has merged together four labor laws. Social security code merged together 9 labor laws. Industrial relations merged together 3 labor laws, and OSHW working condition code merged together 13 labor laws. So all together we have 29 labor laws merged into the 4 codes. So I will go briefly into these 4 codes and what their implications on the labor market. So the one good thing of this code on wages 2019 is that now minimum wage has been made universal. So irrespective of
Sarkar,
whether a particular employment is listed in the schedule of employment or not, you have to provide all employments are covered under the minimum wages. So
Dr.
it extended
Sarkar,
to the all employments. The coverage was extended. Wage is also very clearly defined because earlier different wage laws had got different wage definition. Now you have a uniform wage definition, and also digital payments has been sanctified in the law. So these are the good points of the code on wages. The critical areas is that the total spread over of working hours, like working hour remains 8 hours, but the total spread over can go up to 12 hours. That means working and non-working period together can go up to 12 hours, which is presently 10 and a half hours. The thing is that employers can misuse this option, and they can make a worker stay at the workplace for 12 hours. So there is a kind of a apprehension that this will lead to a kind of a winding up of his entire shift. Like presently, where 24/7 work is being done, carried out, you have 3 shifts, 8 plus 8 plus 8. Now that can become 12 plus 12. So one entire shift can be wiped out because of this provision. Because it is very difficult to monitor the working and non-working period. But once the employer has the option of detaining an employee for 12 hours, that can be utilized to keep the worker for 12 hours, and entire shift can be winded up. That will have a very negative impact on our employment kind of a situation. Many people may lose job because 3 shifts will be converted into 2 shifts. Another inherent gender discrimination is there in the fixation of the labor in the minimum wages. In the minimum wages, the requirement is 2700 kilocalorie. Now that calorie, and there is a very standard size of family that is assumed, that is 4, man, woman, and 2 children. But while calculating the calorie requirement of the entire family, the adult requirement is not multiplied by 4 but is multiplied by 3. 3 comes from the the breakup is 1 plus 0.8 plus 0.6 plus 0.6, that is 3. But here the woman member is given a lower calorie intake, but there was no justification given, and it is continuing for long, and it is continued in the code also. The draft rule mentions this. So problem is that there is no basis why women require less calorie, and also the growing up children needs a much better calorie kind of requirement than 0.5, 0.6. So it should be 1 plus 1 plus 0.75, 0.7. It should be at least 3.5, if not 4. And if it is 3.5, if minimum wage increases by, suppose the one is 100, and if you're multiplying presently 1 into 3, now present minimum wage is around 300 rupees. So if it is multiplied by 3.5, so minimum wage for a unorganized sector workers would go up by 50 rupees a day. So if he or she gets 240 days of work in a year, and every day unorganized sector workers get 50 rupees more, and there are 45 crore unorganized sector workers in our country, you can see the jump in the GDP, and also not jump, you can see the kind of money transfer that money transfer that happens to the working class, and the kind of thing that it can boost the aggregate demand, which also is very relevant in today's economic condition.
And also, you would like to wind up in another 10 minutes, please?
Yeah, I will do that, madam. I will do that. I will ensure that in 10 minutes I finish my talk. So another thing that with regards to the code on wages is that it has provided for equal pay for equal work across gender. Like if a woman employee does the same work as that of a male employee, then the woman is entitled to the same amount of wages. But it has not done across work. So it should have been prudent to incorporate this principle of equal pay for equal work within the design of the code of wages. This could have solved many a problem. This could have saved a lot of anomalies that Indian labor market regularly suffers, since there had been lesser incentive to hire contract or casual labor. So if the casual and contract labor are to be given the same facilities as a regular worker is given, then there would be no incentive to hire contract or casual labor. So Indian labor market has witnessed steady informalization. So that could have been rectified if this equal pay for equal work is explicitly inserted within the labor code. And it has been explicitly told by the many judgments of the Supreme Court the last 2-3 decades. So many times Supreme Court talked about equal pay for equal work, but irrespective of the kind of designation that you give to the worker, whether a contract worker, whether a casual worker. So if the work is same, so remuneration and other benefits would be same. So if that had been very clearly mentioned, that would have solved many a problem. But unfortunately, that did not happen. If you look at the Industrial Relations Code, in Industrial Relations Code, there are few critical areas I would say that that exist in the Industrial Relations Code. One thing is that the strike lockout thing almost now is not a possible. Presently, in public utility service only, you need to give a notice of 14 days before you go for strike or lockout. But other kind of establishments, except public utility services, there is a possibility. It is possible as a last resort, though, that workers can strike or employers can lock down. But now, irrespective of the nature of production, in nature of the establishment, all establishments have to give a 60 days notice before they go for strike. And after giving the notice, you cannot go for strike for the next 14 days. And within the 14 days, conciliation is bound to start. And once the conciliation starts, you cannot go for strike. So technically speaking, legal strike is virtually become infeasible in such a context. Another thing is that this flexibility context is very important, because now that threshold, earlier, the present threshold is 100. If you have 100 or more workers, you need to take approval from the government with regards to retrenchment, layoff, and closure. But now it is this threshold has increased to 100 to 300. So now up to 299, employers are free to retrench workers or close establishments without taking any approval from the government. And also there is this sanctification of the fixed term employment, but there is no kind of cap on the number of renewals you do or minimum tenure timing. So 1 year, 5 year, 2 year, 3 year, no tenure is given, but it sanctifies fixed term employment. One good thing about the fixed term employment is that it is a relationship between employer and employee rather than a contractor in between. That is one good thing. And also it talks about that the fixed term employee is entitled to all the benefits that a regular employee, if the fixed term employee is doing the same work as a regular employee. And fixed term employee is also eligible for provident fund, gratuity, all those social security kind of thing, even though they might not kind of satisfy the minimum criteria. But the problem is that particularly with regards to the white collar employees, so there is a possibility that employers will resort to fixed term employment rather than taking any person on a regular basis. So maybe 10-15 years down the line, even the regular employee will be converted into the fixed term employee. So another problem with this code is that even for the standing order, certified standing order is nothing but rule book, do's and don'ts in an organization. So if you have now present obligation is that for more than 100 or more workers, you need to have a certified standing order, and certification is done by the state. So now now this threshold has also again increased from 100 to 300. So up to 299 workers, there is no need to have a certified standing order. But in the absence of a standing order, there is a possibility that workers might get victimized by the management. And the last point regarding the Industrial Relations Code is that there is a 51% threshold for sole negotiating union. That means if a trade union have a membership of 51%, that becomes the sole negotiating union. So any other union will not be able to participate in the collective bargaining if in any establishment one trade union becomes having a membership of 51%. So that makes very difficult for the new unions to come up, because if we look at the growth of trade unions, you see the trade union doesn't become big in a single day. They fight for the workers' right, they participate in the collective bargaining social dialogue process, and over the years gain confidence of the workers, and then they become big. But if you start with 51%, the existing big trade unions will have an advantage. So the smaller trade unions will find it very difficult to survive in such a situation. With regards to the Occupational Safety Health Working Condition Code, the main problem is that this code covers establishments with 10 or more workers. So it excludes establishments which has less than 10 workers. But the question is that this code talks about safety, health, working condition. And safety, health, working conditions is about life and death. Safety conditions are very important, but how is that one establishment having 9 units, 9 employees don't have to follow the safety norms, whereas safety norms only come into play if you have 10 or more workers. So safety of a worker should not be related to the any threshold like 10 or more, like that kind of a thing. Safety is important even if a single worker is employed there. So safety should have been universal. Basic working conditions like drinking water, toilets, like rest period, all these should have been, even for a single worker, these are important. So even in other countries, in developed countries also, safety norms don't apply on a threshold basis. But here we have this code which talks about that this code will apply only to establishments having 10 or more workers. That means you are leaving the entire informal sector without any legal obligation to follow safety and occupation and health kind of guidelines. And also it deregulates the contract labor in the sense that present contract labor obligations comes when you have 20 or more contract laborers employed, but here this threshold also increased from 20 to 50. So that is quite a large number. And also it reduces the factory also from 10-20, it has become 20-40, because number of factory workers, if it is more than 20 with power, more than 40 without power, then only the factory definition also changed. So most of the smaller factories will be outside this OSHWC code. So there are a lot of exclusions within the OSHWC code, which could easily be included within this code. And last point regarding this last code, that social security code, I would say that it was an opportunity missed in the sense that universalization of social security should have happened, given our experiences during the pandemic and the lockdown that followed and the conditions, the sufferings that migrant workers had to undergo. So that, like, now the maternity benefit, provident fund, gratuity all remain for the organized sectors only, that 10 workers and 10 workers and more. Even in case of EPF, it is 20 workers and more, that still remains. So laws have been merged together, but the laws applicability, individual applicability still remains. So the basic objective of codification is lost here, like when you have different applicability for different chapters. So unorganized sector workers have been included within the social security front, that is okay, but that is social security schemes, and the social security schemes are inherently different from the institutional social security. Suppose I give an example, maternity benefit. If you are a formal sector woman employee, you will get a maternity benefit of 26 weeks paid leave. But if you are a woman worker in the informal sector, at best you may be entitled to some monetary schemes like 10,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees at best. So you don't have any job security during your pregnancy period or any kind of maternity 26 leaves kind of a thing. The best you can get is only 10,000 rupees at max. So social security schemes are inherently different from the institutional social security like gratuity or maternity, which still remains outside the access of unorganized sector workers. So that insider outsider debates continue. It is still continue. And also the private sector, mostly the private sector employers mostly remain outside the social security framework. Even gig and platform workers have been included, but the gig and platform employers are named as aggregators. So I think when the employers are like getting the advantage of the benefit of the productivity of the workers, but they are not playing any role in the provision of the social security. It's great that state is taking care of social security part to a certain extent, but why the employer's responsibility is kind of overlooked. I think employers should also be held responsible to providing social security. Overall, this is my last slide. I take 1 minute or two. So overall, the impact on labor market of all the four codes together is that the codes are not sorry, it is not like I typed wrong. Codes are not radical departure from the existing laws. So code have merged together all the labor laws, but the laws remain what they are at present. It's not that there isn't much change. And whatever change that has happened, that is actually kind of help the kind of attending to the demands of the employers to a certain extent. So code sanctifies certain things which are already been carried out in the last 2 decades. Like this 100 to 300 kind of threshold has already been done many states. Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, Telangana, all states have already has increased their threshold. So now the central government is increasing the threshold, is like going to the same direction. And also it strengthens the new liberal economic outlook with a certain bit of welfare administration. So it's basically kind of affirmative action towards the things that happened during in the labor market in the last 2-3 decades. It's not a kind of a very substantial departure from that. And also the problem here, the concerning factor is that the SDG, this SDG goal, the goal number 8 is of attending decent work, but we are still quite far from attending decent work. So we are even on most cases we are unable to even kind of ensure minimum wages. Forget about social security. So by 2030, the roadmap towards attending decent work is not very clear from the formulation of these labor codes. So I stop here. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarkar, for that very nuanced presentation on the labor codes. I was just curious to know that when you say jobless growth, how do you factor in skilling? Because with the global competitiveness, technology, the industry has been saying that they are not able to get skilled people, and skilling is one of the factors which also connects labor to industry. And how do you see the role of the state governments being in the concurrent list going forward, particularly with the pandemic? I think work from home has changed the equation to quite an extent between casual workers who are now not available, low female labor participation rates. So how do you see it going forward, Dr. Sarkar?
Regarding, you have very rightly pointed out the skilling factor. Like here also, the state, both the central government and state government have initiated some very important, like ministry has been kind of introduced in the central government skill development ministry, and that come up with a skill development guideline also in 2014, and which was later on kind of updated in 2015 also. And also a lot of vocational training institutes, ITIs, polytechnics, their number has increased many folds. But I think the problem lies about recognizing prior learning, RPL, recognizing prior learning, because many workers who we termed as unskilled workers, they are not actually unskilled. They actually learned a lot while working. So we have to recognize that, and we have to kind of design out, because it is not always possible for these workers to leave their employment and enroll in a kind of a skill development program. So we have to see how we can develop skill for the informal sector workers beyond the curriculum kind of a thing. So there are ways, there are examples, there are good works done. So we need to highlight those good practices, and that good practices need to be replicated.
But did you see a lot of state governments taking proactive steps in this direction? Because we've been discussing about certification and an accreditation board for those who already have certain skills but who do not have a formal certification. Do you see this getting strengthened by the state governments? Do you have some good examples, good evidence?
Some good examples. The government of Kerala, government of Madhya Pradesh, government of Uttarakhand, they have kind of institutionalized RPL, prior recognition of skills, like recognition of prior skills. So they have also what they did, they have tried to customize skill development programs based on the ground realities. Suppose you are doing skill development for the street food vendors. So in Tamil Nadu did that in Coimbatore. So they have developed skill development programs which is near to the workers' place where they work and outside their working period. Suppose you are doing skill development before they start working for 2 hours. So that kind of initiative is not like that they will go into new polytechnic or new ITI and learn new skills.
Sure.
First of all, you need to recognize their existing skill and also enhance, reskill them, but within the given context. Like that will be customized, not like a set standard.
Yeah,
But problem
we'll now open the platform for everybody to please raise your hands, ask questions. I'm sure the issue of pandemic and its impact on the relationship between labor would come up during the next few questions. I think Malaysia, would you like to? Are you raising your hand to ask a question, please? Please go ahead.
May I ask?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening to the very to Professor Sarkar and Madam Gauri. I heard you in the beginning, and this was a masterful exposition, and your introduction to the topic was wonderful, and you provided very useful information. So my question, Professor Sarkar, let me introduce. I am Professor Ashok Vishandas, and I am also director in the EGROW. And at the same time, I'm professor of economics in Indian Institute of Public Administration. So I really enjoyed it. Added, knowledge to my domain. Two small questions. One is labor productivity in agriculture is very low, which can be seen from the fact that 46% of the labor force just produce almost 18% of the gross value addition, GVA, or you can say GDP. So obviously, this figure itself shows that labor productivity is very low. That is point one. And now, relating to this, if we see the labor, enrolled or registered under MG-Narega, even in 2022, so many years of the independence, on one hand, it's very good that they provide a lot of employment to unskilled workers. But on the other hand, we are still operating in a very low level of the orbit in the growth, because if we have that number, large number, about 10 crore people seeking jobs under MG-Narega, that is a reflection on our policy paradigm. How can we explain that so many people, unskilled workers, are there? So what is your idea or your recommendation to skill the unskilled labor and scale it up so that they come out of this? And let me also add, I did some study when I was chairman in CACP in Gujarat. At that time, the wage rate for agricultural labor was about 108. So some of the diamond merchant, they took them out and trained them in polishing of the diamond, provided some fan, and they were paid at that time 500 rupees a day with a training of about 20 days. Now something like this, because we have to increase the income, not only the very basic minimum wage rate. So what are your thoughts on these 2 points?
Dr. Sarkar, over to you.
Thank you, Professor, for asking these two very relevant questions. My submission on these two questions is that you rightly said that on the latest count, 42% of the workforce is producing around 14% of the output. So, but they are not in agriculture because of their own volition. They are in agriculture. This huge labor force is still tied to the agriculture because they have no option. Because some of them went out and tried to have occupation in secondary sector and the tertiary sector, because the very low employment elasticity of the secondary manufacturing sector, they could not be absorbed. So the classic Lewis model could not work out. Like the surplus labor from agriculture could not be absorbed in the secondary manufacturing sector. So they had to remain. Like suppose a piece of field that can accommodate productively 10 workers, they have 30 workers now. So the 30 workers, they don't have any option, but they still continue, because remaining unemployed is a luxury for many of us, for many of the poor people. So what they do, they are still doing something or the other in the agricultural field. So the productivity as a whole is very low. So, and we have the last 2 decades, this so-called kind of phenomena of quote unquote working poor. Quote unquote working poor means they get some work in the primary sector, but they still remain poor because the return from the work is so low. But these surplus labor force, if they have to be kind of absorbed in the manufacturing, because I think the service sector is already also overpopulated. So only sector that can give meaningful livelihood option is the secondary sector, even non-manufacturing sector within the secondary sector. And one example that provided good number of not very decent employment, but good number of employment is construction. Construction is non-manufacturing, but in the secondary sector.
Let me just supplement what Dr. Sarkar is saying, Professor Ashok, by mentioning that I have a more optimistic outlook. I believe that the industry is now recognizing, particularly pandemic. I think during that time, people have realized the limitations of casual and contract workers going back and not being available at all, affecting. And they also, at least in my observations, I found during my travels in the field, that the industry is now getting more proactively engaged in reskilling, like Professor Sarkar mentioned, that the construction workers, being reskilled. So in both that plus agriculture you mentioned, and I find that a lot of technical people have gone back to their homes during the pandemic, relocated. And they bring in a new vibrance in, I traveled through Himachal extensively, and I found a new vibrance in terms of doing dairy, in terms of, so horticulture, a lot of horticulture crops. So I find reason to be optimistic that something is working out. But do we have any other questions from the audience, please? Yes, Manoj, Mr. Manoj Kumar Chaudhary, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Manoj from Mahatma Gandhi State University. I'm doing in the field of.
Can you please raise the volume, Manoj?
And my research topic. Yes, ma'am, sure.
Please go ahead.
Migrant labor in the real estate initial stage of my research, especially from Sarkar, that is there any regarding for the real estate workers, as you have mentioned that there are so many unskilled workers, skilled workers, and skilled workers.
Can you please write in the question and answer thing? I think it'll be much easier.
Okay, ma'am, but one thing, that is there any laws for the real estate migrant laborers in India?
Dr. Sarkar, you may like to respond.
Yes. There is a law that is called Interstate Migrant Workmen in 1979. That law is now being merged with Occupational Safety Health Working Condition Code. But that law has lost relevance, particularly because the migration that has been constitutionalized in the 1979 Act was that the migrant workers, they move from one state to another state, like escorted by the contractors. So contractors need to register themselves in both the home state and the destination state. But nowadays migration don't happen like that. People, the surplus labor flows from the agriculture, they just go from one state to another state without the contractors. So you take a train and reach Delhi and try to get some job there. So no contractor is bringing. So in that sense, the framework of Interstate Migrant Workmen Act has kind of changed a lot. Like that premise is no longer valid. So that is also been recognized by the code formulators, and they have now said that migrant workers can on their own, on through self-declaration, can register in the EGROW portal. And EGROW portal is getting very good response. Within a 6 months period, less than 6 months period, more than 25 crore workers have registered, and a significant number of those workers are migrant workers. So now even the code, for the first time, any labor law talks about research on migrant workers, helpline for migrant workers, study on migrant workers. That is mentioned in the OSHWC code. So those are not there earlier in there. So now labor laws are also like looking at the migrant workers from a different prism, because the existing prism is inadequate. That has been fully experienced and recognized by the lawmakers.
Thank you,
I
sir.
think Mr. Manoj wants Dr. Sarkar's is requesting Dr. Sarkar's email. I'm sure EGROW will deal with it separately. With Dr. Charan Singh, if you could please do that. Do we have any other questions? I think Dr. Sarkar, you've been making some very interesting, bringing some insights into this whole debate, and it's very interesting. I do hope the state governments are listening, because there are a lot of things which the state governments can do. Do we have any more
Yes, because
questions?
yes, very rightly said, madam. Because the unorganized sector, the entire unorganized sector is administered by the state government. The central only administers only those workers who are in the central run units, but rest more than 90% of the workforce is actually administered by the state government. And different state government has approached differently, but there are many good practices. We need to kind of bring out those good practices and discuss more about those good practices, how different state governments deal with labor matters.
Dr. Charan Singh?
Unfortunately, we don't have that framework, that platform where state to state interaction happens. It is between center and state. So we need to have some state to state, between origin state and destination state. So that is also needed. That is somehow something which is missing.
Dr. Sarkar, the Ministry of Labor has these meetings with all the state governments periodically. So that is one forum. They also constitute subgroups across states, but not as much as one would wish. One hopes it will be more. Dr. Charan Singh, you perhaps have a question.
No, I'm very comfortable. I thought it's so much of knowledge and clarification, but there is a question in the chat box by Sai Premnath, which is to both of you, Madam and Dr. Sarkar. And I thought that was an interesting question, something which I have been thinking about. And that is, do you think mandatory social security compliance can promote informal labor market? If yes, why so? And what are your thoughts about the absence of a universal state-sponsored retirement scheme? Indians bank upon the PF and other related schemes to build their retirement corpus, but different pension schemes are fragmented, unreliable, and difficult to distribute among the liquidity-strapped informal sector. What's the solution here? So I thought, madam, you would have lots of views on this.
Professor Sarkar, you first, please.
Yes, I try to answer this question. Regarding social security, I think social security, the entire formal informal kind of dichotomy is based on whether a particular worker has social security or not. So if we provide if social security can be extended to the informal workers, there would be to a certain extent formalization of the informal. So the entire objective of formalizing the informal can be achieved through social security provisions. So here the code has started the process, but I think those like employees provident fund would have been a very useful instrument. So where even a casual worker should be obligated to get registered under the EPFO. So what you do, that EPFO also provides pension. Now EPFO also provides pension, and it also also sets the responsibility of the employer, because there is an employer's contribution also. So it's not entirely on the state to provide social security, because ultimately the product of the labor's output, the labor's productivity is enjoyed by the employer. So employer has got certain obligation to contribute towards the workers' social security along with the state. So here, if we can, but it is still possible, like it is still possible through new kind of notification amendments, that you bring under the EPFO, which presently, as Madam initially pointed out, 6.75, if you can progressively increase this number and to include workers in the informal sector, I think that would kind of increase our safety net for the workers, because next time, God forbid, this pandemic kind of situation again strike us, so we'll be in a better position to deal with that. So we need to increase the safety nets. So and universal pension should be a basic criteria. So that can be done through labor laws also, because EPFO already showed a way out, because now EPFO also has a pension component to it, and the minimum pension is 1,000 rupees. So it can go up depending on your contribution to the EPFO.
It's a very interesting question that was asked, why we should not have universal pension. I think, EPFO didn't have a universal pension earlier, which was very marginal. This was increased to 1,000 rupees per month, which still is inadequate. And EPFO numbers, as I was saying, that earlier the construction workers and contract workers could not be part of EPFO because it was not portable. Their accounts under EPFO were not portable. Now that was done in 2014, that they became portable universal account numbers. And the expectation was that a lot of construction workers and contract workers would be moved to the formal category and formal protection under EPFO. The numbers have gone up from 4.25 crores to 6.75 crores, but actually there is a long way to go there. And I personally feel that the state governments have a huge role. And with the pandemic, I think it has become very clear to the industry that they need to have more people in formal employment. I personally feel that EPFO is the way to go for pension, and also for the unorganized labor, where 25 crores have registered. The Social Security has to provide for a universal pension. So I'm very sanguine that going forward that the state governments would actually be introducing these pension. I think somebody was asking what's the role of the civil society. Universal pension is a pension. I think Anendu Sanyal is Anendu. Can you please come in? The mic is all yours. The floor is yours. So Anendu, I don't know. I think he's not able to get into audio. He's saying Assam already has. And that's something I think which research institutions like EGROW can take a lead in of putting together best practices, between states. I think just some best practices that is easy to do. For agriculture, somebody was asking the question whether agricultural sector we could have some sort of a pension. I think there are insurance schemes which are being thought of, and gradually we'll have to move to universal pension as part of Social Security. Dr. Sarkar, you would like to add something to that, please?
Like universal social security, another good point I forget to mention during my presentation is that ESIC, because most of the people they move from non-BPL to BPL section just because some sickness strike them, and after that the cost of treatment is so high that they move from non-BPL to BPL. So ESIC is a very important instrument also. But in the good thing about the code is that now the ESIC, the threshold has been withdrawn. So technically speaking, the government can now extend ESIC benefits even to the informal sectors, because the threshold of 10 workers and more is not there anymore officially but one thing that is needed is that for ESIC benefit to be extended to any establishments or informal sector, there has to be a notification from the government, central government. So one thing that can be done, that ESIC benefit can be extended. That is another indirect way of increasing the social security, in the sense that because the medical treatment costs a lot in today's context, and many people suffer because of that. So ESIC and also EPF, this put together, this will have a dual role. It will provide social security and also it will formalize the relation between employer and employee. I think there has been a systematic dismantling of employer-employee relation over the last 40 years. So we need to kind of undo that kind of a thing. And like formalizing can happen only when you recognize the employer-employee relation. The seemingly non-relation, like seemingly, there are a lot of many people who seem the home workers. So they are working for employers, but their employers remain absent. So we, through this social security instrument, it is possible that you link this up and formalization can happen. And I also given my email ID in the chat box. So
yes,
anybody, those answers I cannot provide you because of paucity of time. They can write to me. I will try to answer to my best of my
Mr.
ability.
Anup Gopalan wanted to ask a question. The floor is yours, Mr. Gopalan, for the last question.
Professor, am I audible?
You are, you are
Yes,
Mr. Gopalan.
audible.
Thank you very much, Professor Sarkar and Professor Gauri, Professor Charan. It was great listening to all of you. And it's something which is to be discussed very, very seriously, the new labor code, etc. Now, this happens to be the 125th birth anniversary year of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who was also a great industrial relations expert, who was also the president of the AITUC, Tata Workers Union, etc. Now, the labor codes, yes, there are pros and cons to it, but most of the trade unions, to some extent, even the ruling party's trade union wing, has expressed opinion that it is a little more pro-capitalist. Now, there is also a fear that the concurrent nature of industrial relations will slowly die down. For example, states like Maharashtra and Kerala have better labor laws than the rest of India. I just want to make one point of reference here, since I started with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's 125th anniversary. Long back in 1939, he had rightly stated that if the labor problems are unattended to by the government in power, it will become a major political problem for the government. Farmers have already shown that things are not good with labor too. Thank you for allowing me to voice my opinion. Thank you, Professor Kingshuk, Professor Gauri, and all of the esteemed seniors here. Thank you. I'm a teacher from Bangalore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sarkar, Dr. Sarkar, for a wonderful treatise on the codes and the way forward. Thank you very much, EGROW, for organizing this and for inviting me to chair the session. Thank you very much.
I must thank our speaker and our chairperson for the session. I must just reveal a secret to you. I requested her in the morning that can you please, I know it's a very short notice, can you please chair the session because I think I am to chair. Her unanimity, her kindness, and she said, okay, I have just arrived and I'm ready to do it. So that's the commitment to the subject. Though she's retired, you can see that she's on top of the subject and her commitment to the subject is so obvious. Thank you so much. I must also thank the speaker for having prepared his notes and given in detail such information which I as a layman would never have been able to understand or capture or collect anytime. Must thank you, Professor Sarkar, for this presentation today. Participants, I must thank you all for being with us. We were 90 plus at one point of time. We are generally discussing socioeconomic issues, but today the labor discussion has revealed to me that in our future seminars, we will be including labor laws in a bigger way. I have an important announcement to make. Next week, Friday, we have Dr. Bhalla, who's the Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund, and Professor Prakash Lonjani, who is the Deputy Director in the Independent Evaluation Office and an economist with the IMF for nearly 20 years. They're speaking to us about inflation. And inflation is turning the tide in monetary policy across the planet, in the US, in India, in Euro, everywhere, in Brazil, Russia. So I'm sure that's another interesting session for all of us. I would invite you to all. I'll send you the exact timings because this is in Washington Both the speakers are from Washington, so it'll most probably be around 6 p.m. in the night, but I'll give you all the details and we will then expect all of you to join us, participate, ask questions, make the discussion lively and rich, and contribute towards wisdom creation that we are attempting at EGROW Foundation. So thank you very much, Professor Sarkar. Thank you very much, Madam Gauri, and thank you very much, the participants, for asking these relevant questions, enriching our discussion. The recording of this will be available tomorrow by noon on our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the wonderful audience and to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Gauri, and thank you, Professor Singh.